So I wanted to talk to you about the Destiny conversations with Nick Fuentes because my whole thing is, I spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos, and it's kind of like it's the paradigm is the online is the bubble, and you need to move out of that, and touch grass, right? That's like the meme, and I get that, but on the other hand, I kind of view it as what happens online because so much is online and all the new generations are getting raised online. It's like this is the leading indicator for culture, right? What happens in these online spaces, what happens in the Destiny, Nick Fuentes saga, all that will filter through to the broader culture, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you about because you had tweeted, um, it was a bunch of Sneeko talking to Nick Fuentes and all that. And you said, yeah, the culture is shifting,
Mm.
and so I mean, what was your thought process behind that?
Well, I have seen Sneeko I was familiar with years ago. He was kind of like doing these kind of more vlog style, personal vlog videos, and he was a younger guy, and he had a big following, or I guess he still does. And I saw him starting to just come out with videos that are more I don't want to say political, but just videos that are more critical, I think, of the culture online, and I guess in New York, where he's from. I just loosely follow him. I haven't watched that many videos of his, but so I saw that, and then I saw he was kind of talking with Destiny and these more political figures, and even Destiny himself is a bit of like this political chameleon, who's had a lot of. I mean, throughout the years, he's been streaming for a long time, but he sort of was like a neoliberal at one point.
Oh yeah, far left
And then,
SJW, right?
yeah, like, well, yeah, to some extent. And then now he's more like, I don't know about conservative, but certainly like very critical
Centrist.
of the left or whatever you want to call it. And so he's changed. I think he's kind of changed who he's aligned himself with quite a bit, which I'm not saying is dishonest or anything. It's just interesting to see whatever you make of it. And then so like him and Sneeko collaborating. I think Sneeko's like this younger, kind of has like a more a new perspective, whereas Destiny is like a bit more established. So having their audiences collide is kind of I think probably uh, a significant thing for the culture or whatever that's happening
Right.
online. But it is hard to tell though to what extent, because we're all in our own bubbles of this with the internet. It's hard to tell like how impactful this really is.
Hmm.
And
Right,
I don't know,
because
but
or go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell, like especially when it comes to one uh, creator or streamer, how big their audience has an impact. But I do think when you have two different people with very different audiences colliding and agreeing or talking, that's kind of when you start to. That's why I said like the culture is shifting, is because uh, just on their own, if one of them was saying certain things, that's one thing, but because then it's like their own enclosed community. But when you have these communities that don't otherwise cross over, collaborating like that, I do think that's a pretty powerful shift. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like synthesis. It's like thesis and antithesis. Now you have the two different ends of the spectrum colliding. I think, yeah, because to your point, like, are we just watching something? Is it just a bubble? This is just exists on YouTube or whatever. Like Nick Fuentes is the poster boy for like the far right America, right? Like he's like MSNBC will call him out as the leader of the vanguard fascist far right. That's what they call him. And so my perspective is like again, and I'm caught in this paradox, and I struggle to decide how much of this is just trying to justify the amount of time I spend watching these videos. But I think like people, the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, because I think it is upwards of millions across all the platforms, the millions of people who watched the conversations with Nick Fuentes and Destiny and Jadion and all them, just having a conversation, they are literally getting unfiltered information like about the quote unquote leader of the vanguard of the far right in America. Like if political polarization is a problem, which I think it is, it's arguably one of the biggest problems, right? Up there with whatever else, climate change, biological warfare, cyber warfare, then getting a direct insight into the leader of the far right, movement's ideology and kind of thought process and personality, all the subtle stuff, It's like the millions of 14 and 15-year-old kids who watch those debates are more informed than the people who watch like MSNBC and just see a little 30-second biopic on it, right? Like, do you think am I missing something? Is there something I'm not seeing in terms of I'm overestimating the value that those kind of conversations provide, or what do you think?
No, I mean, I do think that's highly influential. But yeah, I mean, I think I do think it's very influential to have those audiences listen to videos like that. I don't know if, I guess from my perspective, I don't know whether he really is this leader of the far right or
Right.
what that even means, because it's like if that's a label or a narrative that's kind of constructed by certain media outlets or corporate media outlets, you know, how true is it really, and what does that even mean? How
Right.
big is
Because
that movement? But having those large audiences watch these people, um, I definitely think is really, yeah, it is quite influential on the culture for sure.
you think it's healthy, or do you think there's a danger in kind of bringing Nick Fuentes's regressive ideology, which I think it's fair to call it that, to the degree that I understand it. I've listened to him for a little bit, and I don't know how much you listen to him, but I don't think it's beyond the pale to call his ideology regressive in a lot of ways. Do you think it's dangerous for him to kind of import that into kind of the mainstream conversation with like an impressionable audience of, I average age of Destiny or Jadeon viewers got to be like what, 16, 17, 18, something like that?
Mm. Um, I, I mean, this is probably like a cliche answer, but I'm very pro having people having ideas challenged, having people challenge each other's ideas in a more like open or public way, where there's not just a little soundbite, but it is a sort of sorry, my dog. Hey.
It's like, that's a hairy
But
hand. Oh wait. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's how you sort out the bad ideas from the good ones. I think that's how you sort out the bad people from the good ones. And
Right.
yeah, I mean, we've heard this all before, but it's like otherwise it's just left up to a few people pulling the levers and deciding who is or isn't acceptable. Like even if you hate, you know, Fuentes or Destiny, and you think that they're horrible for the culture and they're misleading people, just censoring them or silencing them, I think is going to actually create more problems in the long term than having their ideas challenged in a way that's like healthy and thorough, in a long
Right.
form kind of thing.
And I don't know if you've watched Max Carson, Mr. Girl, went
Mm,
after Destiny for having this conversation. His claim was like, you're sanitizing Nick, but which I, in some sense, agree with and understand, maybe understand more so than agree with. But um, I think if Nick Fuentes is having a conversation with Destiny, he has to change. He has to morph, right? You can't, like, he has to drop some of the just absurd nonsense in order to even begin to have a conversation, right? So I think that's the converting aspect, you know?
mm. Well, I mean, if that's true, um, if he's sanitizing Nick, then actually wouldn't that be a good thing for people that are against the right? Because it's like, well, if now he's forced or he's being presented in a way that's more safe, then he's kind of adapting to the tone that Destiny is setting, right?
Right,
So,
because I've seen Nick literally say like, I was in I was in a Twitter space with a bunch of trans people, and they were telling me like, yeah, actually, Nick, we don't hate you so much. We just disagree with you, but we believe in your right to free speech. And he was like, oh, that was pretty cool. And then he quickly, I saw him. It was in the conversation. He quickly was like, well, it doesn't mean I agree with their degeneracy or whatever. But like that
mm,
was that was the beginning of him like, oh, actually, the things that I claim to hate, I don't actually hate. I hate like a caricatured version of it. And
mm,
by honestly engaging with people who are transgender or something like that, it's like, oh, actually, maybe Nick realizes it's not the fact that they're transgender that's a problem. It's the fact that a lot of transgender ideology gets associated with far left ideology, which is a problem in and of itself. But it's not the fact that they're transgender is the problem. But
mm,
like his ideology would purport that it's the fact that they're transgenders that's the problem. So it's like him just being in these spaces and then his audience following that. And again, I
mm,
think it's just if he is a leading figure in the far right, which I agree with, is like I don't even know how true that is. I'm just kind of using mainstream media as a barometer for that, even though why should I even do that to begin with? Like they don't have their finger on the pulse. But let's say that's true, then I think it's really influential. And like all, your videos, I watched the Zoomer Life one. That was good.
Mm.
The come on and zoom, come on and zoom. That brought back memories. Um, yeah, because I mean, you're interested in like tracking culture and whatnot. I mean, in your opinion, do you think that it is just a bubble, mostly the online meta culture, or do you really think it is influential and downstream? And I mean, have you seen it play out that way, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've seen it with, I don't know, this is somewhat anecdotal, I guess, but I've seen with certain figures online, family members or friends or even just random people I meet, will know about them or will talk about them. Like I was actually at I was at a supermarket a few days ago, and this guy, I was at a Trader Joe's, and this guy stops me, and he says, "Wait, are you Glink?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, I heard about the event you hosted in Austin because I watched Destiny, even though he didn't go to it, but I watched Destiny and I heard about you, so I just want to say hi or something." And I was like, "Huh, like that's kind of funny that." Some random guy who just watches Destiny, I guess, and probably knows me from his stream or his content, just stopped me in the supermarket to say hi. And and I have like little cousins and stuff that know all about that knew about Andrew Tate and
Sure.
Sneeko, and so like these people are. It's certainly not everyone. Like there's a lot of normies or whatever NPC or well, not NPCs and normies are two different things, but like there's a lot of normies, I guess, that are younger people who don't know anything about anyone on the internet, don't know anything about
Sure.
Destiny, about any of these political circles. But for the subset of, probably mostly young adult males that do pay attention and do care, um, even if it's just like a couple, even if it's just like 5 million people or even less, like even just a few million, um, they're still, that subset is going to grow up continuing to have certain values or thoughts or
Right.
opinions
Right. It's a
about
long-term
politics.
propagation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not even if the majority of people don't know about them or don't care, the amount of people that do, especially if they're younger, are going to kind of reverberate throughout the rest of society and
Right.
culture. I mean, yeah.
Right, and it's like that. I think it's a 3% rule of like it only takes 3% of a population to like do a cultural shift. Like the American Revolution, I think it's only
Mm,
like 3% of people that were bought in on it culturally or whatever. And so it's like yeah, okay, if like Andrew Tate's a good example. I think he's more than 3%. He's like everywhere on TikTok, and
mm,
everyone who's online is familiar with him. But that again, that's the paradox I struggle with of like since so much of our life is lived online just by that just that's the technological reality we're in generational there's a generational reality to that. It's like I think people normies so to speak, which I hate using that word just because it's like every time I use that word I further remove myself from the
uh,
normies, right? But like people who aren't plugged into the most the early adopters of culture, right? Like on the early adopter curve type thing. It's
mm,
like they're missing how this will reverberate later on. It's like it's like in the universities, right? Like what happens in the universities, it's like the postmodernism stuff that's now filtered through to everywhere. It now becomes mainstream, and it's like, and I have a minor in gender studies, and in this was 4 or 5 years ago in college. We announced our pronouns at the beginning of class, and I remember my mom. I was like a family party. My mom and my aunt or something like that. They brought up like at such and such university they have you say your pronouns like at the beginning of class, and now that's like standard issue on LinkedIn or whatever. Like every social media has a place. It's structurally set up to be conducive to that ideology of like, well, gender is so fluid we can announce our pronouns or whatever. And so it's that kind of leading indicators that I'm sensitive to, and I don't
mm.
know. I think your videos hone in on that specifically. Your OnlyFans one of my that was how I discovered you. I've watched that 2 or 3 times. That's one of my favorite videos because that's just this is a new technology. It's a new platform, and the way it changes culture, where it's like someone who you go to high school with, like a girl in your high school class, could be an OnlyFans model that you could be paying, and going back and forth and having messages and whatnot. It's like the potential for that to just warp warp in a good or negative way is significant. So yeah, it's a paradox, but like the insecure part of me and the self-hating part of me wants to just, this is all just rationalization for the amount of time you spend online. But I'm like, there's a big part of me that I think is correct in this. But
Mhm. No, for sure. I mean, I do think it's significant. I mean, that's why I make videos on it, is because I think I wouldn't make a piece on OnlyFans if I just thought it was like some nonsense trends that will just go away.
right,
But it was because I saw, like, okay, all these girls I follow from that I knew from the streaming days, where they weren't doing really anything necessarily lewd or nudity, anything like that. But once the opportunity arises to make a lot of money on something like OnlyFans, I saw my timeline full of people advertising theirs, and I guess honestly, like, my finger on the pulse or my read of culture, a lot of it is from Twitter. Not necessarily just because I think the people I follow are like totally the most relevant, but it's like when you see something that has 500,000 likes or retweets,
yeah,
and you see multiple things that have 500,000 likes or retweets that are kind of like saying a similar thing, again, that goes to like, okay, this not only does this say a lot about the people who've liked and engaged with this tweet, but also think about all the people who don't even have a Twitter account, who aren't active on Twitter, but this is sort of representative of probably a lot more people as well.
right.
Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of my view of things, is like, you don't always need a big statistical survey. And oftentimes those things will come out way later.
Yeah,
Like, oh, this
exactly.
is like, yeah. But
Right,
you can
right.
have a read on what's happening just based on understanding that a certain number of people, a certain commonality is representative of many more people as well.
Right. It's not nothing. And you can make the case that because the majority of people on Twitter and the social media platforms are younger, like from a long-term perspective, those trends might not be immediate now, but it's a good predictor 5 to 10 years from now. So because I remember the example I always think of is there was a comparison of it was Jeremy Corbyn versus Boris Johnson, and they had both made a similar tweet like 2 days before the election in the UK, and Jeremy Corbyn had like 500,000 likes, and Boris Johnson had like 15,000, and it was a complete sweep. Boris Johnson wiped out Jeremy Corbyn,
Mm.
and so it was like, here's why Twitter is not real life. Like you would think from Twitter, 500,000 likes, this guy's going to win because that's where the cultural pulse is, but it's narrow. But to your point, if you see the same thing cropping up differently, and political elections are different, that's a lot more stuff. But from like a cultural trend, because it's it's not
Well, yeah,
a
I think it's a trend of what's to come is the thing.
right,
Is like
right,
right now, Boris Johnson might have won because most voters are older. They're not on Twitter. They don't care
exactly,
about Twitter. That is like the reality right now. But day by day, the reality is changing. And the proof of this is the past few years, like you said, with the pronouns and stuff. I mean, so that might have started as a trend on Twitter or something,
right,
5 years ago, but now it's like everywhere. So, yeah.
right. Because the way I think of it is it's not just this is a what would you say, a snapshot of culture. It's a feedback loop. So once that
Mm.
has 500,000 likes, everyone sees that it has 500,000 likes, and now in their minds, oh, this is a cultural norm now. Oh, it's everyone has their pronouns in their bio. Oh, that's just normal now. It doesn't matter what your opinions are. You're just seeing it kind of around you, and it's like and this is one of the most interesting ideas. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Is we are at a time. Are you familiar with like Richard Dawkins' theory of memes, like memetics and all that, right? Memes and
I've heard about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the idea is like what genes are to genetics, memes are to memetics, or what genes are to like a biological body, memes are to culture. Like every
Okay.
every biological entity is made up of a genetic code, genes that replicate, and then every cultural complex, so like a language or a cultural norm, is made up of memes, individual
Mhm.
memes. So like the sign of the cross is a meme. That's a discrete meme. Just like there's a
Mm.
gene for blue eye color, right? You can like narrow it down very discreetly. But the idea is like we're at an age where cultural evolution, because of aided by Twitter, where I can make a tweet, it goes viral, and now that shapes culture in a, plants a seed. The rate of cultural evolution has increased exponentially, right? So, we took all this time. Natural selection takes forever with genetic evolution, because genes got to die out and all that. But that's not what we're concerned with nowadays. We're concerned with cultural evolution, and the rate at which these ideas propagate are just at an unprecedented rate. TikTok, it's like TikTok is a window into the collective unconscious. I think it's like it's directly, because it's not just. First off, you're not searching for anything. You can choose who to follow, but your For You page is often people who you don't follow. So it is feeding you a random subset of the culture, a random sample of the culture, right? And then it knows how much time, even if you don't like anything, it knows how much time you're spending on each video. And then if you like it, it gives feedback. So the process of consumption is also a process of production, right? Because it's saying, you've consumed this, so now we're going to privilege content that's similar to this. And then if you start to upload content, it does the same thing. So it is this self-propagating reflection of like the collective unconscious. And that's how I view social media. And it's like, I don't know, again, to just brush that off as it's TikTok, it's just dancing, is like, it just seems.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. I think that's how I view it too. Yeah. But it is, yeah, but I kind of, what I'm curious, this is like very meta, I guess now, but
Sure.
I wonder how many people, I feel like more people are starting to view it that way, whereas maybe previously more people would just be very dismissive of it. But I think more
Right.
people are kind of coming around to seeing the significance of this, and how, like you said, it is like a reflection of the collective unconscious. Because yeah, I believe that too. And I think I think if you have that view of it, you start to see the real like gravity of these platforms, and how how impactful they are, and how they're driving. I think they're basically serving as well, sort of like a channel, that controls the way culture is going. And like I
Right.
think about time periods a lot, like the 60s or the 90s. There was not this mechanism to steer culture in a certain direction, and it's being steered now, not just by the platforms and the formats of the platforms, which inherently steer things in a certain direction, but also the moderation, the censorship, the removal of content in
Sure.
terms of service,
Yeah.
these kinds of things, the kind of ideas that are allowed and the ones that are not allowed. So it's like overt, and it's also subtle in the way that, like,
Right. You have
even if,
conscious and unconscious factors
mm,
that control it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, and that, to me, it is kind of yeah, it's concerning, because I feel like those waves of counterculture, like the 60s, like the 90s, I would argue, were a good way to give us breathing room from. It was a pushback against central authority, or like dogmatism in general. It's not even always about the government either. It's, religion throughout history. I think there's been periods of time where religion has been like the dominant culture, right? But then there's been
Yeah.
pushbacks against religion. But now I think that we run the risk of heading into a time when a true counterculture, a true like renaissance, or pushback against certain things is becoming more and more difficult. But that's back to the Sneeko thing, is like, I think the way around, the way now to do that, to foster that, is just through like organic connections between creators, because they have a lot of influence themselves. So even if the algorithm doesn't necessarily drive Sneeko's videos to Destiny's videos, but if Sneeko decides, now I want to collaborate with Destiny, well, you're sort of creating the algorithm now. You're
Right.
creating the cultural
Right.
shift. So I see, yeah. So like, I would like, so that in a way that gives me, I guess, hope, or like, we still have. I don't think it's too late in that sense, because people can still choose who they want to talk with, who they want to make connections with, and some of those connections can have really big reverberations.
Right. Right. And I've talked about how like the society can. I cited one of your in the Zoomer video that you were talking to some guy and you're like, do you think society is collapsing? He's like, oh yeah, major, definitely, right? And it's just like a casual, I think of the Bo Burnham, the song, what's the line? He's like, 40,000 years of this, 7 more to go. And it's just like, yeah,
Mm.
we casually accept that society's just going to collapse. I mean, I talked to a friend who started smoking cigarettes again. He had just quit, and I literally told him, I'm like, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm going to tell you this anyways. Like, the chance of you developing lung cancer is probably lower than society collapsing anyway. So like, I'm not going to push you as hard as it. And it was like kind of a joke, but like, there's not, you know, and like for me, like, okay, I could put money in my 401k, right, for my retirement, but like, I don't put as much money as I might otherwise put into a retirement account because I'm like not that confident that I'm going to be around to withdraw it, or, you know, even if it's not that extreme, like there might be some rough times ahead that I would rather have more money now than save up for the future, right? And it's like that the feeling that society is collapsing. It's like there's many ways that it could happen, and you know, I can't do anything to prevent a disease from spreading or a cyber warfare or something like that. But the way that I can contribute in my own small way is, okay, well, polarization, societal collapse, mass psychosis, that type of stuff, social division could be one of those leading factors. And, you know, making these observations, looking at culture, trying to piece things together, trying to act out like a healthy ethic rather than just be an observer and a commentator without being in, you know, part of the videos that I do and part of what I talk about. You know, that's the contribution. So I started. I was hoping to get your advice actually. I started my channel almost 2 years ago. I'm at like 2,500 subscribers, and it's weird for me because I'm just getting to the point where it's like, you know, I've got a couple videos get 1,000 views or something like that. But I've had people that follow the channel for a while, and I talked to one of my longtime viewers for the first time, and it was a great conversation, and we'll be talking again later. And I struggle with. I don't think of myself as a YouTuber. I don't think of myself as a content creator. I don't think of myself as any of that because it's just like so weird. Because like if I tell my friends that who aren't even on YouTube, it's like, all right, Paul, like I'm a digital media influencer. It's like, okay, that's the joke. I make that meme. But talking about these issues, it's like, well, hold on, like these actually are of importance, and like any video can go viral. Anyone can see any video. I've had big YouTubers see my videos criticizing them, and it's like, okay, well now this is much higher stakes than I thought. This isn't just me shouting out into the abyss. If you were to give advice to someone who's just kind of up and coming on YouTube and kind of navigating the dynamics of it, the parasocial dynamics of it, the relationship with the audience and whatnot, what would you say? What are your best lessons from your experience and your observations?
Well, I would say that the videos of mine that have done the best or that have like grown my presence online, I guess the most, are kind of like the OnlyFans video, or I made one talking about like the golden age of the internet, and one about uh, the parasocial problem with Twitch.
I did watch that. It was a while ago, but I remember watching that one.
And I mean, it's you know, the thing with YouTube is like obviously it's there's not like one formula that always works, but
Sure.
I feel like when there is like this topic that's in the zeitgeist, that's in the conversation on Twitter, that's going around, like when OnlyFans was kind of popping off, it's like everybody's talking about it. But usually when everybody's talking about something, NFTs are another example. I didn't make a video on this, but I know I have a few friends who did, where it's like everyone's talking about NFTs, but everyone's giving like the most surface level take, where it's like, oh, it's either stupid or buy my NFT or something, right? But I feel like when you can condense complicated ideas down, not necessarily like simplify it completely, but like with NFTs, if you can provide some insight to something that's always being talked about, but yet is rarely discussed beyond just the surface level analysis.
Right.
There's always a place for videos like that, because not only is it useful information, it's also relevant information. And you can sort of build like a style because you're going in deep. You can do interviews, you can do just research or something that you're not going to get from like the typical types of videos where, okay, like big YouTubers like Criticals or something, they'll give their 2 cents on every trending topic.
Right.
But
It's just stream on and react. Right.
and I mean, that's one way to do it, but it's pretty like he's built that platform.
Yeah, he's got credibility for people to care what he has to say in the first place.
It's like the marketing is big on YouTube too. If you can get a title thumbnail that looks really clickable and enticing, and then the actual content of the video is interesting and engaging, holds people's attention, no filler, straight to the point.
Yeah.
That is like the best advice I can give. But really, the real best advice is like you have to just keep uploading and keep trying, and eventually you'll find either a formula or like a barometer of like why certain videos of yours do better than others. And you'll never fully figure it out probably, but the best way to get closer to figuring it, to like working with the algorithm and balancing what you want, is to you have to keep trying different things and being very self-critical.
Right. So do you have advice specifically as it relates to interacting with your audience? Do you respond to most comments, every comments? Obviously not every comment, you've got a lot, but I mean, how do you kind of navigate? Okay, let's say, 15, 20 people leave comments on your videos, positive, negative. How do you navigate
I
that?
try to, with comments, with anywhere on social media, I have a mentality of I want to reward the comments that are constructive or like kind of like meaningful or
Right.
just significant. And I don't want to give any engagement to the ones that are just flat out, vitriolic or toxic or whatever, where it's like, I don't care if something's critical, that's one thing. But if it's just like, fuck you, this sucks,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
suck, whatever, there's no point in even if someone's like saying some asinine claim about you and they're really like they're in your DMs or something. Like I've seen people on Twitter, like one of them is I don't know if she still does this, but Shoe on Head, if you know who that is. Like
Mm-hmm.
she would quote tweet people that are like saying kind of like nasty things to her. And it's like, okay, even if you come back with a great insult and your audience loves it and all that, by quote tweeting that or by including that in a video or by responding to the comment, you're inadvertently saying, if you leave comments like this, I will reward you
Yeah,
with attention.
exactly. Right.
So the move is like just reward with like with a response or interaction, like liking the comment or whatever. I think you have to just pick the ones that it doesn't have to always be something that's like self-aggrandizing or like sucking your dick or something, but
Right.
just comments
Constructive
that
feedback, yeah.
yeah, and that's like the thing is I would just only engage in things that you want to see more of and don't engage in the things you don't want to see.
I wanted to ask you about Jordan Peterson because if you could tell from my channel, I focus a lot on Jordan Peterson's work, and I watched your the Saving Your Father from the Belly of the Whale video.
Mm.
And I also watched your conversation with Mr. Girl about porn. You had a couple conversations with him. It was like pornography, and it got into. I remember saving the clip. It got into. It was like I hate calling him Mr. Girl. I generally don't like because you're Greg, right?
Yeah.
So and I'm PF Young, but my name's Paul. I always try to, if I can, I try and lead towards the real name, just to keep one foot into normie land.
Okay.
Max Carson was saying something to the effect of like, I would rather be tortured for eternity than stop existing. I'm like, I think you need to consider that one a little bit longer. But you guys had a great conversation that I thought ran along very similar lines to the Peterson Sam Harris disagreements. I don't know if have you watched those debates he's had? Yeah, he had those 4 debates he had with Sam Harris. I think are some of like the most. I still to this day think those are some of the most significant, like philosophically significant videos. I think that represents the leading cultural divide, not between like the far left and far right, but like to the degree that there's a reasonable center, it either falls along the Peterson lines or the Sam Harris lines. I don't know. Have you? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
What I remember that really stuck out to me, and I think we kind of got to this in the Max discussion, is like is the idea of like, okay, well, what is truth to you? What does truth mean? Because if truth is just whatever is like a fact, like a scientific fact or determinable fact by some measurements or numbers, then you live in a completely different world than somebody who they view truth as like this sort of universal objective quality about reality or about the world or about people. God could be this, or like just the concept of like a unifying objective truth versus that such a thing doesn't exist, and the only truth that does exist is like facts. But of course, facts can exist alongside an objective truth.
Right, and subjective experience, lived experience, as much as that term has been, beaten down incorrectly, it's like the truth lies in the experience itself as well. The quality of the color red is not it. Like, is that a fact? It's like, well, arguably colors don't exist in the objective world; they only exist in your sense perception, and then the quality is another level behind that. So it's like, and you had made a good point about like, just because you can measure it doesn't mean you've encapsulated the whole thing, right? You can measure your relationship with your partner based on the number of texts you've sent or conversations you've had or whatever, and it's like that it was so interesting to just see. Wow, I'm watching the Sam Harris Jordan Peterson debate about truth play out in a conversation about porn, and I also witnessed it on like on a stage with thousands of cheering people. It's like this says something about going back to the idea that there's a pattern. If you see the pattern like on Twitter or whatever, there's some significance here. It's like this indicates that this philosophical debate is real. And I think it's like, I call it the reverend biologist perspective versus the transhumanist materialist perspective, where it's like there's something about like we evolved, and there's something deeply rooted back in our ancient evolutionary history that is sacred to some sense, where we shouldn't allow human rationality and hubris to alter with, like with gene editing, versus the transhumanist perspective, which is rationality is the highest ideal. And if we can come up with we could alter genes and we could save so many people. It's like, those are two perspectives that, I lean towards the reverend biologist perspective, but like those are two, like I said, those are the two, what would you say? If there are any right paths forward, it's one of those two, right? It's not the far left or the far right, the Christian dogmatism or the, radical chaos kind of mentality. But it's one of those two, and so I don't know.
I agree. I agree with that. Yeah,
I think
you were at the thing in person.
No, I was no. I know. I actually just talked to someone who was at it. He said it was awesome. No, I watched when those videos came out on YouTube. I watched them twice and spent the whole night. No, that would have been awesome to be there. But I still, it's a nerdy thing, I guess. But like, I get a little bit of chills and my hair stands up a little bit when I hear they ask halfway through the debate. They're like, "Do you want to keep this debate going, or do you want to have Q&A?" And they're all like, "No, keep the debate going." It's like there's something optimistic about that. Like, oh my God, people are cheering like a sporting event at like continue the conversation. So that's a whole rant. I guess the question there is like, what significance have you found maybe in your personal life or in the broader culture? Do you see Peterson's influence, maybe like the materialist, that divide, not just Peterson, but Peterson in particular as well? Where have you seen that influence in your own life and then kind of in culture?
A lot of places. It's funny because I don't even really like. I see sometimes like clips of Peterson now and stuff on Twitter or YouTube or whatever, and I like him, and I feel like I've gotten a lot that I can get out of him. Maybe that's not fully true, but I don't. Yeah, like in a way, I think it is greater than just him as a person. Although I think he was like a bridge to a lot of this.
Absolutely, his ideas are far more important than him. That's kind of how I think about it. Yeah,
and it's funny because I feel like I know a lot of people who are like more self-improvement types. They're kind of more responsible, adult-like people, you could say. Like men that are kind of more self-confident and like kind of like real, genuine, caring people. A lot of people I know, like in real life and even online, they almost like Peterson is almost like a background thing. Like they won't be like, "Oh yeah, I watch him all the time." They'll be like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of him," but like really like it's kind of like it was a phase of their life too. I can tell. Like okay, back in 2017, 2016, whatever, they watched him, they got something out of it, and now they're kind of like living their lives in a more responsible way, to some extent informed by what he said. But I think that's the point. Is like the point is not to focus on him, but the point is to take something out of it and actually just be your own person after that. Your own more actualized or more like reaching more of your potential, I guess.
Individuated,
and then
right.
And I've noticed as well the people that are like depressed, that are reliant on systems of mental health care or certain pharmaceuticals, and just like have this, they tend to be the ones who have like the more strictly materialist point of view. And like, no, they don't believe in any sort of God. They're not even necessarily agnostic. They're like very, I believe in science, or science is like the only thing that matters. And it's like, and I was trying to make this point with Mr. Girl. It's like, you know, he's kind of like a professed, like, he has like sort of an empty view of certain things, or like I would say like a pretty open about like his dark, maybe
Yeah, his
hedonistic, or
shadow.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like he is his shadow,
He's
like
integrated. Yeah,
yeah.
I admire a lot. I made a video about him, going like, man, he's got an element of radical authenticity. That's what I called it. It's like
Mhm.
dangerous almost, like not the ideas per se, but like for himself, to just utter transparency into the shadow is kind of how I think about it.
Hmm. And so I think like, you can look at someone like him and be like, okay, well, at some point you have to choose. It's like, choose the world you want to live in. It's almost like independent. Forget about what conclusion you come to through even complete rationality, which is kind of the point of this whole thing, is that it's not about rationality entirely. Because it's like, at a certain point, if Max and people like him and the lifestyles they have is uh, is a reflection of what they believe, then okay, choose what you want. Do you want your life? Do you want your future? Do you want the future of your children and society to be more like that, or do you want it to be more like, I don't know, like maybe Peterson, or somebody that is more aligned with Peterson, some like self improvement person? I don't know, just throwing out different
Jocko
names,
Willink or
like,
something.
sure, yeah, whatever. But like that's the thing, is like, do you, at a certain point, it's like you have to choose your path. And I think a lot of people genuinely just would rather. Uh, I think people are afraid. I kind of got the read from Max that like, it's almost like there's this fear of viewing everything as if everything matters,
Hmm.
as if like there
Oh
is a
yeah.
meaning, there's an objective truth, because that means you are accountable for your actions. You are accountable for what you do and what you think and how you treat people and all these things. And I don't think he's a bad person, or even, like an evil person necessarily,
Or
but
yeah, no more worse than anyone else. He may be a bad person, but no more worse than you or I.
mm, yeah, but I don't know. Like, to the extent that he's honest and willing to have a conversation, there's some hope there, And to the same thing with like Sam Harris, or those kinds of people, where it's like, okay, the fact that they're willing to have a conversation is at least, leaps and bounds ahead of the, politically radicalized people who won't even engage in the conversation, who won't even have their ideas challenged. So that's a great starting point, at least. If there's any hope of progressing ideas forward, or like, yeah, like having a philosophical sort of revival I think we're at like a weird place right now with philosophy, where it's like, I feel like, yeah, it's like we're in such a post truth, or whatever, information saturated world, that like there's very little outlets for people actually seeing where we're going, because they're so inundated with what's
Right.
happening every
We
single
need a
day.
vision for the future, right? You need to
Hmm.
orient yourself towards. I think that we are. You were saying we're in a post-truth era. We're in like a weird stage in philosophy. The analogy I think of is there's two. One that's more peripherally related to the conversation we're having. I think of the fall of the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. It's like we're in like the American Republic is falling, and it's like, well, hopefully we don't go into an empire. But the idea is like, just because you see a nation collapse, starting to collapse in certain ways, like it could be, we could have a second constitutional convention and fix a lot of things, and have an internet bill of rights that solidifies this stuff. That's one thing. But the other thing is, I think when it comes to the philosophical realm, it's like, I do think there is a bridge that is being built between science and religion that has not been at least this strong before. Maybe it was always there, but now it's being seen. And I think it's accurate to chalk that up to a technological fluke, is how Peterson describes it, because the printing press, when Martin Luther was around and led the Protestant Reformation, which is arguably a significant cultural and philosophical moment, right? That was that was aided by the fact that books, the written word could now propagate itself throughout the world. And now we have podcasts. Now we have the internet. We have that technology times 10, right? Because far more people can hear and watch videos than they can read. It's like you have these ideas. You have, I think the example Peterson goes to is like there's truckers listening to the Sam Harris Jordan Peterson debate. It's like there's something so valuable about that, about real philosophy being embodied out into, everyday people who live in the real world, rather than it's just we're just going to argue my perspective and your perspective and then go drink champagne and afterwards and whatnot. And so I think there's significance there. We definitely are in a transformational era, and the technology reflects that as well, if not contributes to it. Definitely contributes to it. We're at 51 minutes. I'm respectful of your time. Anything you want to talk about, or anything on your mind that's come up before we kill it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I was going to say, like, I do have some hope for the future as well with the kind of culture I'm loosely following with TikTok and stuff, where it's like, all like the astrology and like the TikTok witches and like all these like crazy, batshit crazy things that you hear about on TikTok, and that's obviously the platform preferred by the younger people, the teenagers, the young adults, and to me, like that is actually, I see something in that is very optimistic, which is this interpretive worldview, this interpretive view of reality being adopted by younger people, as in they don't care so much about what is the experts saying about the facts of this, or what is the doctrine of the day about what astrology or what people should believe, or like scientifically this is all that there is. It's sort of, and I think millennials were kind of very much kind of bombarded with that. Like the early days of the internet was like all about atheism and just like, the death of God basically. And just this sort of like Reddit atheism that I think a lot of millennial types, Max, Destiny, and others certainly I would think would fit into that. But I think if as things continue, I think we're going to see more of this like return. I would say it's almost like a return to like paganism, or like alchemy, even this sort of like very interpretive view of science and of the world and of people and themselves in it. And I mean, that's kind of where religion started, I think, at least culturally, and I think it's like this return to stories, hopefully. And I think this is something I really agree with Peterson about, is that the power of religion, aside, take away all the doctrine, all the hierarchies of it that sometimes I think corrupt it, but the actual central message of, say, like the Christ-like figure is a very powerful, transformative story. And this whole thing with astrology that's very popular is like, whether you think it's all bullshit or not, it almost is irrelevant to how powerful of a story is it that drives people forward.
Right.
So I think there's some hope in that. And I do, obviously I'm not saying it's all like to be treated with equal weight, but it's interesting. And I'm kind of, I have some hope in that.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Well, I do think the best story does win. And I don't mean the best argument, although that's part of it. The best narrative wins, and I think the narrative that is predicated on the most truth is the best narrative. I think that's just how humans are set up. That's our way of interpreting it. So, I think of people say bad ideas spread super quick nowadays. Like, that's true, but good ideas also spread quick, not as quick as bad ideas. But good ideas have staying power. A bad idea, passes through the culture and everyone recognizes it as a bad idea at some point. But a good idea, now how many millions of people, 20 to 30-year-olds are listening to Jordan Peterson or people that I would regard as positive figures and applying that kind of responsibility idea in their own life? How many of them own small businesses? How many of them work for corporations? How many of them are part of academia? How many of them are part of art? It's like, the artistic world. It's like, there is, I'm optimistic in a similar way, I think.
I could be out of my depth here, but I think something significant about like, let's say, the Christ story as well is that it is the combination of logos, of like logic, of reason, basically. So in other words, it's not just random story made up out of nowhere. There's like there's a factual truth at the core of it, but also with ethos of like, a sort of moral or like a like a transcendental quality about it, like this higher concept of God, you know. And so I think right now we're so focused on logic, on reason
Yes.
and rationality, which is important, of course. Like you said, I actually do. I don't think you can throw that out either. And maybe that's happening a little bit on this like TikTok culture where it's like, okay, it's all just completely, you know, throw it all against the wall, right? But if you have the sort of intellectual, rational, reasonable stance combined with this reverence for something, this acknowledgement that there's this understanding beyond what we as humans can comprehend out there, then that's where you have the most powerful stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Acknowledge the truth of intuition. Have you by any chance watched the Peterson and Ian McGilchrist conversations?
No, no. What's that? How's that one?
That's what exactly what you're saying. You know the whole like the right hemisphere versus left hemisphere
Mm.
idea that's kind of central in Peterson's work. Ian McGilchrist kind of is the I think I'm equally out of my depths here. He's like a leading researcher in that field, and I was like, you know, that sense of meaning that you get when you're zoned in on something, and like you'll start going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, and then you'll come back, and then you're just going down all these different branches and whatnot. The Ian McGilchrist Jordan Peterson most recent conversation is exactly that, about how we are in a logocentric society because we have a part of our brain that is focused on language and logic that is good for specific taking things apart, but it is incapable of understanding the full context. I'm actually going to do like a 5-6 minute video on why logical consistency does not equal truth for that reason, and it's going to be about abortion and whatnot. And it's going to be the lens it's going to be tapered through, but it's that idea exactly. If
That'll be
I don't know
interesting.
that
Yeah, I'll check that out.
yeah,
Thanks for
it's
showing it.
yes, he goes into a lot of neuroscience stuff, but there's a couple great examples of just yeah. There's one where Peterson is talking about how he had a client who had OCD, like severe OCD, and he asked Peterson. He said, "How do you, when you're on the subway and you see like a newspaper on a chair, could be dirty or whatnot, like you don't know if you want to pick it up and read it, but maybe you do if it's a magazine." He said, "How do you know whether or not to pick up a newspaper that's on the chair? Like, how do you know what? Can you explicitly say that?" And the idea is like, no, you can't possibly come up with all the rules, the propositional rules around at what point do you like look at something on the subway and decide like, is that worthy of being picked up? Do I want to avoid it? Do I not? But you can tell just by looking at a glance. And that's like a whole thing about that's the capacity of the right hemisphere to just take in all this information and immediately recognize that as true versus the left hemisphere, which is propositional logic and all that. So yeah, that would be something interesting. But
Yeah. I'm actually going to speak with Jonathan Peugeot on Friday, if you know who
no
that is.
way. Are you serious?
Yeah, yeah, because
Dang.
I almost find him more interesting than Peterson because he's all about, as you probably
Sure.
know, like
Yeah, I could tell you.
symbols and
Yeah, yeah. You definitely. Yes, I could see that. Yes.
yeah. So that'll
Wow.
be interesting. We'll
What's the
see.
context? Or what's the context you're speaking to him?
I mean, I honestly just emailed him or like his manager, and I was like, I'd love to have a conversation. I saw him on this podcast called Break the Rules, which was, I could send you that episode, but it was like this
Sure.
interesting conversation, kind of a smaller podcast, but he appeared on it and they had a great conversation. Like he talks about more recently this thing called, the concept of the fall, which I think is relevant to like what you're talking about with societal collapse or like the fall of Rome and all that. And it's like he talks about like through biblical terms, like the fall of man and like what that means. And like one thing that was really interesting, he was talking about chimeras emerge during the fall, and like I was gonna bring up, I wanted to talk with him about furries, and like I feel like furries
Ha
are the
ha
modern
ha.
day
Psychological
chimeras.
chimeras.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Oh yeah.
So
That's
I want to
funny.
talk with
That's
him about like
awesome.
modern symbols. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Peugeot's great. Wow. That's cool. Well, hey, if you don't have to, if you get a chance, if you can just ask him directly, does he believe in evolution? And if not, how does that manifest in disagreements with like Peterson or whatnot? Because I've always wanted it. Because they always avoid it. I'm always like, wait, does Peugeot believe in it? Because every time I see Peterson talking in a room with Peugeot, he's talking about evolution. I'm just thinking they're like, Peugeot's an Orthodox Christian. He doesn't believe any of this, does he? So like, what is he thinking when Peterson is giving like an evolutionary account? You don't have to ask it, but if you have
Okay,
other questions,
that's
but I would
interesting.
love to. I'd love to hear that. That would be. I'm very
I can
interested in.
also,
I'm very interested in that divide. But yeah.
yeah, me too. I can also send you their contact or his contact if you want, if you're interested to reach
Yeah,
out
that
or
would be
something.
awesome. Well, yeah, I'll wait for the. Are you gonna post? You're gonna have like a podcast conversation and post it. I would assume, or are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
stalking them offline?
Actually, I was thinking about streaming it.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have to. I might stream it, or I might. I think I might stream it, and then either way, I'll have the recorded thing and then
Okay. Cool.
post it on
Yeah,
YouTube.
I'll
Yeah,
watch it and then maybe reach out. Yeah, that would be awesome. That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
Right on.